You are listening to Arcane Carolinas, an exploration of the Carolinas' folklore, legends, myths, and modern weird. Each episode, we examine the historical context of our topic and aim to preserve some of the stories that help make this part of the world such a fascinating place. Today, on a very special Arcane Carolinas, we hear from an old friend, the devil himself.
Wow. I haven't heard from that guy in a long time.
It's been several episodes. But that kind of plays into a pattern that we mentioned in the Devil's Tramping Ground of the devil almost being this boogeyman-like character in a lot of traditions the settlers of North and South Carolina had, right? All kinds of legends around this character. Apparently, he does leave the tramping ground or the tater patch, whichever your preferred location is, from time to time. So that's what we're going to be exploring today. Today's episode will be titled something along the lines of The Devil and Hezekiah Jones. But before we get into that, I'm Charlie Mushaw. I'm sleepy and have a zit on my forehead.
I'm Michael G. Williams, winner of the 2020 Mainly Wade Wellman Award, which I'm still bragging about because I just found that out when we were recording. And I am also sleepy.
All right, so we're both sleepy. I mentioned the zit on the forehead because it's important, because one of the lies that we tell kids is that when you grow up, you won't get zits anymore.
My God, let me tell you, speaking directly from my mid-40s, it is such a lie.
So that's important to bring up because a lot of times these legends aren't necessarily 100% factually true.
No. I reject your rejection of them.
Now, I really enjoy kind of digging out that kernel of truth from which legends are built. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of what I'm going to do today with this one, because I like the story, I like the message, and it was fascinating to find the potential origins of it.
Great. I love that kind of real history behind a legend, in part because that reveals what was important to people in the first place. Why did they pick that story to retell?
So our story starts in Onslow County, North Carolina, which is eastern North Carolina. It's on the shore.
Okay.
English settlers arrived there in 1713. The county was established in 1734. And for a very long time, I will say until World War II, it was a rural, agrarian, and maritime economy. Quiet county, not a whole lot going on. This all changed in World War II because the Army established a base there, which is now closed. And the Marines established Camp Lejeune, which is still there and operational.
Oh, okay.
And the population and economy and basically the feel of the county exploded. You can look up census data for the county and see like, oh man, it really changed. And Camp Lejeune has its own great tradition of spooky stories. I have read some really spooky stories out of Camp Lejeune and the surrounding areas. So we will definitely come back to Onslow County at some point.
Okay.
It's primarily a tourist destination these days due to its beaches. I'm personally a fan of North Topsail. If you've ever watched the Weather Channel during a hurricane that's hitting the Carolinas, they love to use shots of North Topsail because it's falling into the ocean.
Ah, okay. I didn't realize that that's the county where Topsail Island was.
Yeah, so there's all these big sand. To call it a sandbag is a disservice to sandbags. They are a different thing than these massive sand-filled contraptions that line the northern part of North Topsail Island where the erosion is just out of control. And the Weather Channel loves to use shots of this particular inlet. So if you've ever watched the Weather Channel during a hurricane, you've seen this place. And we try to promote local businesses, small businesses in the area. There is a great restaurant there called Ocean's Edge. It's kind of on the top of a hotel. I would recommend checking them out. They are sometimes booked for events like weddings, but I will say that they do carry out even if they're booked. How do you know that, Charlie? Let me tell you. As the guy that wound up getting invited to a wedding while covered in sand, wearing flip-flops and swim trunks, because I interrupted a very sweet moment between a bride and groom on the elevator on the way to their wedding reception while trying to go get food from the restaurant. I was like, ding! Doors open, they're there. I'm like, oh, you guys go ahead. And they were like, no, come on. And I was just like, I feel really awkward right now. They're like, oh, where are you going? I was like, to the restaurant. And they were like, oh, that's where our reception is. That's where we're headed. I was like, you guys should really just go ahead. And so as the bride and groom make their entrance off the elevator, there's like beach bum Charlie behind them, just like, I would really not like to be in your pictures.
I don't know if there's a more beach wedding moment than that, frankly.
So I rode the elevator with them, doors open, people took pictures of them. I was there, excused myself past them. They were like, you should come to the reception for a minute. And I was just like, no, I really shouldn't. And but the restaurant still served me carry out from the bar, which was nice.
Oh, that's good of them.
There's also an active historical society in North Topsail that hosts events and has some really good stories to share about the surrounding area. Check them out. But they do not share this story. This story comes from a book that you told me about a while back called Forgotten Tales of North Carolina.
I love that little book.
It is by a guy named Tom Painter and Roger Kammerer, and it is full of short tidbits of forgotten or lost stories. Here's one about a giant pie. In August of 1848, there was a public dinner in Goldsboro. About 1,500 people attended the affair. There were barbecued beeves, hogs, and lambs, and an enormous pie. This pie was composed of 120 chickens and 2 hogs. That's the story. That's it.
That's it. 120 chickens and 2 hogs in one pie.
That
is a big pie.
Yeah. So it's full of stories like that. Like, how many sentences is that? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 sentences. It's almost like the old, you might know this. Which author, there was a challenge, it was like, tell a story in 6 words.
Ernest Hemingway.
Yeah, so the Hemingway 6 words challenge. We got the lost knowledge 4-sentence challenge here. Anyway, there are more lengthy tales in this book as well.
If I remember correctly, the way that I pitched that book to you or recommended it to you was sometimes the story is a man was very old and had many children, the end. And sometimes the story is, and then the dragon came out of the sky and ate half of Onslow County or whatever.
Right. So it's a really good mix of tales. The final story in the book happens to also be my favorite one from the book.
Yeah.
And it's titled The Night the Devil Got Hezekiah Jones. Very much an oral tradition presentation. The opening line is, the story was told in the 1950s by one of the witnesses and goes back to the early 1900s on Queens Creek, Onslow County. So we're already starting with a concrete location and some squishy dates.
Yeah.
So, but at least we have, a solid location. Someone told someone, not necessarily the author, this story in the 50s.
Okay.
But the story goes back to, according to the source, the early 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a man that was a Confederate veteran named Hezekiah Jones. He was married multiple times and was very, very cruel to his last wife. She was blind. And apparently old Hezekiah had a habit of just straight up abusing her. He would trip her, stick her hand in boiling water, was basically a real to this poor woman.
He does not sound like a pleasant person at all. He sounds like a horrible abuser.
Yeah, so Hezekiah Jones is not a good person in this story. And if you'd like to hear what I said, you can follow us on Patreon.
Yeah.
I assure you, you've heard the word before, but you may not have ever heard me say it. If you know me in my personal life, you have heard me say it. It's one of my favorites.
If you need a custom ringtone for text messages, things like that.
Yeah, you can have me cussing people up and down.
There you go.
So his final wife passed away, and he was kind of left to fend for himself, but nobody liked him. His relatives didn't like him. His kids weren't fans. And he was very alone, and he eventually fell ill and became bedridden. The word the book used was his mind became deranged. I think we might nowadays call that cognitive decline.
Yeah, I think that kind of sounds like dementia, the way that the story is phrased.
So there's this lonely old bastard who nobody likes, with good reason, who's bedridden.
Right. Nobody should like him.
No, bedridden and losing it. And people would come do basic things to make sure he didn't die. Nobody wants to let the old bastard die, basically. They don't want that on them. So they will occasionally come and do things for him. And he would suddenly raise himself up out of bed and began screaming bloody murder that the devil was going to come for him.
I think he probably had pretty decent reason to be afraid of that.
Yeah. So one night, the end is near for Hezekiah Jones. 2 nieces come to take care of him and basically see him on the other side. They sit with him. They're just kind of making sure that somebody's there when he passes. He was laying there, not moving. And they decided that since it was going to be a long night, they would go make coffee. And they went and they made coffee. And when they returned near the bed, Hezekiah rose up and began screaming in torment, begging them to protect him because he knew the devil was coming. Startled, they dropped the coffee pot in their fright from hearing strange noises outside.
Ooh, I like this part.
So he began screaming. The noises got louder. They clung to each other and hid in the corner of a room, facing the corner. They didn't want to see what was coming.
Right.
The sound of hooves and dragging chains was on the porch. The door explodes inwards. They hear an unearthly scream out of Hezekiah Jones, and it is suddenly quiet.
Ooh.
Then the sound of chains and hooves exits the cabin. They turn and look, and he is frozen in horror, dead on the bed.
Oh.
And that was the night that the devil came for Hezekiah Jones.
Wow.
I mentioned earlier, we tell stories to people for various reasons.
Yeah.
Sometimes to make them feel good. Hey, kid, don't worry. Your zits will go away. No, they won't. Sometimes we tell stories to, hey, don't be a or else the devil's going to come get you.
Right.
Let's dissect this a little bit because I really like the story. Again, this is my favorite story in this book because
definitely.
A bad guy gets what's coming to him. It's got elements of the supernatural. There's witness accounts. I like it.
Everybody loves to see a bad person get their comeuppance.
Yeah, it's innate. It's just something that you like.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe not everybody. I'm sure that there is some person much better than me that would be like, they did get what was coming to them, but it's a shame it came to that. There might be somebody out there that feels that way.
My guess is those people feel that way deep inside, and they also feel guilty about feeling that way. And that's why they go out of their way to say that.
I like that. That's what I'm going to carry that in my heart.
There you go. See?
I'm going to put that right next to my love of bad people getting their comeuppance.
The spirit of cynicism is something you can carry with you year round. You don't have to save it for one day.
We should create a holiday. This is the Cynic's holiday.
Cynicmas.
Cynicmas. So the time frame of the alleged telling to publication actually works in our favor on this one because it's not so far back that there shouldn't be records.
This is something where it's in theory possible to determine whether that person existed.
Right. So this is great. I checked out Onslow County court records, birth records, death records, and probate records, and major court records in general all kind of start in earnest around 1914, 1915. Yeah. The registration for births and deaths started in 1913, but compliance was not achieved until 1920.
Yeah, having done some of my own family's historical research, genealogical research, it's basically impossible to track down records of anybody before that because they just weren't kept beyond the family Bible, maybe.
And there were some census records going back as far as 1784, but they were pretty shaky. And there was a storm in 1786 that destroyed a lot of early records.
Okay.
So I found that to be interesting. There were also storms in 1752, 1755, and those dates will come into play in a little bit. You might be thinking, well, Charlie, that's too old. Turns out it's not, and we'll get to that.
Oh, okay.
Because there are issues with the oral tradition for accuracy. Details
Definitely.
get lost. Details will change to fit the lens of the storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
Was the witness even there or just co-opting a story that somebody told them and changing little pieces of it, either intentionally to fit their bias or unintentionally and still to fit their bias?
Yeah. Anybody who's sat around a campfire as a kid has heard the story of the guy with the hook for a hand, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always padded with a little extra quilting of like, this happened to a cousin of a friend of mine.
Right. And this can make research hard or fun, depending on your appetite for this type of investigation. I happen to enjoy it, so I had a lot of fun. And I found 3 possible Hezekiahs that we will explore.
No way.
Yeah. Hezekiah Jones was a person. Hezekiah Jones of Onslow County was a person. Hezekiah Jones, the Civil War soldier, was a person.
Oh, okay.
So we're going to explore the three Hezekiahs and then kind of, come to our own conclusions about who it might actually be about. So we'll start with Hezekiah Jones' Civil War soldiers, because those records are relatively easy to come by. There's a federal effort to preserve Civil War records. There are so many H. Jones in the records of Confederate soldiers out of North Carolina, like a lot. But, that doesn't necessarily mean it's our guy. Henry Jones, Hank Jones, Horatio Jones.
Right. Harry and Harrison and Harold and you name it.
Right. Maybe somebody's first name was just H.
Yeah, you never know.
It was a different time, you see. We didn't have all those fancy letters, so we just gave them one.
I was, in fact, raised by a person whose middle name was an initial.
Homer J. Simpson?
Yes.
Mom, what's my middle name? It's J. No, but what is it? It's J.
No, my father had no middle name. He just had an initial.
Letters were in high demand, and not everybody was fortunate enough to get a lot of them. You got to work with what you got. And
yeah,
you went to the hospital, and they were like, all right, here's your bag of Scrabble tiles. Create a name out of that. Good luck.
His family couldn't really afford to spread that much alphabet around.
Right. The game really changed when Campbell's Alphabet Soup came out. Then they brought the alphabet to everyone. All right, so Hezekiah Jones, the Civil War soldier.
Mm-hmm.
I found a guy born 1842, died 1917. Now, the Civil War ran 1861 to 1865, so our guy was certainly age appropriate to have fought in the war. When the story was told could kind of stand up also. The early 1900s is squishy. I would say 1917 counts as early 1900s.
Definitely.
He did die kind of late on that spectrum, which is an issue for me. But here's where it gets kind of wacky, and I want to do a screen share and show you what I found.
Okay.
He was buried in Haywood County, 20 miles west of Asheville. So complete other side of the state.
Yeah.
So that's problematic. And he was actually a private in the Union Army. He was not a Confederate soldier.
Interesting. So he was a Union soldier.
Mm-hmm.
Now, North Carolina had lots of Union soldiers. There were lots of people who went and fought for the Union instead of sticking around to fight for the Confederacy.
There were also
get on them.
I mean, there were also entire towns or, large geographical areas that would declare nah, we're not going to secede. So sometimes people didn't even really leave. They didn't go off north or whatever. They just stayed where they were. And they're like, nah, we're good.
Yeah.
Which is going to factor into a story that I can't wait to tell about murder Quakers.
Interesting.
You would think
murder Quakers is not a phrase I've ever heard put together before.
So I got an awesome story about some murder Quakers around the Civil War that we'll get to at some point.
Very into this.
So our guy here, let me do a screen share and I'll show you what I found. So here is the record where our boy signed up with the 2nd Mounted Infantry.
Wow. That's really neat.
I thought that was cool. Here is his actual grave.
That is fascinating. His name and his rank and the regiment he was in and everything like that is on a shield. Mm-hmm. Is that shield unique to Union soldiers?
That I don't know. I'm not a Civil War buff. I have no idea.
Okay. Just curious.
But I thought it was neat.
That is really fascinating. Wow. And that's a very current picture.
Mm-hmm.
That's Hezekiah Jones's real grave. That dude, possibly that dude from the story, is really buried right there.
But, like we mentioned, we don't know really where he was born. We know that the time frame could work. He was buried on the other side of the state, and the Union-Confederacy difference is something that, again, could be attributed to oral tradition, or it could just mean that he's not our guy. So there was a dude born in 1830 in nearby Edgecombe County named Hezekiah Jones. Now, geographically, this guy makes more sense for me.
Okay.
The age still lines up for Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
He could be one of the many H. Joneses in the Confederate records.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, that's all I have. I found him in a census, and that's it.
Oh, okay.
Which to me, if you're married multiple times and so cruel that your family doesn't want to deal with you, there's probably going to be a little bit more about you.
I feel like that's a circumstance which today would arise to a whole lot of documentation because somebody would have to bury the body. Somebody would have to dispose of the estate, things like that. There would be a really solid paper trail. If this person died in the 19th century, I'm not so sure that would exist. There were formal means of doing everything then, of course, but things were often done a lot more informally is the impression I have.
Yeah, this one bears mentioning because of the geographic closeness, but I'm not sure that this is our guy. Hezekiah number 3. Now, I will be completely transparent. I think this is our guy.
Number 3.
I think number 3 is our guy.
Okay.
And his story became like an amalgamation of different facts. So our guy, well, my guy, this is my pick. Hezekiah Jones was a shipbuilder from England, and he was married 3 times and had 12 children in his lifetime. This comes from a family member running down his genealogy for a blog about the history of J.A. Jones Construction, which is was this international construction company worth oodles and piles and piles and piles of money. So, tracking family tradition was probably very important to them.
Okay. Does it still exist?
Sort of a legacy. No, I think they either got sold or went out of business or closed and took their ball and went home. The family has ties to Duke. I found a blog exploring their whole family tree.
Okay, that's interesting.
Now, in 1780, this Hezekiah received 100 acres of land on Queens Creek in Onslow County in the township of Swansboro from the newly formed United States of America for his service in the Revolutionary War.
So here's a guy who was a soldier.
Yep.
He lived on Queens Creek. We know that he was in Onslow County, in the right part of Onslow County.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's pretty convincing.
I found that from a blogger whose family has ties to, he's not of the Jones lineage, but his family is like long-term friends with the Joneses. Which sounds like a Disney family movie. Friends with the Joneses.
It's Harry and the Hendersons' neighbor.
So this pretty much sounds like our guy. The timing is way too early unless he lived to be like 140.
The version that is, this guy, I was told this story in the early 20th century about somebody who had just died. That doesn't add up at all. No. But that sort of oral tradition, those details are going to get changed.
So I think this is my story, is that this is a decided blend of source materials. Story gets told over and over. Old Hezekiah is our guy. He was a proper... The story kept getting told, but as the Revolutionary War fades from people's minds, as the story is retold, they just go to the next nearest conflict. Because they knew he was a soldier. Which conflict was he in? Oh, well, it was in the one that's at the forefront of my memory.
Yeah.
And so it gets passed on.
Like, what could be far enough back for this to be an old person? There's probably a brief window of time when the story was told that he was a soldier from the War of 1812.
Right. We can retell it and be like, he was in Vietnam.
Yeah, right. And before, if he was our guy, then there wasn't a before the American Revolutionary version. But, there probably have been similar-ish stories told about veterans of all kinds of wars from all kinds of cultures.
Yeah. And I think that I really like this story so much because it was fun to look up like all the different Hezekiah Joneses, and that the base point of the story, the moral of the story, if you will, is that don't be cruel lest the devil come clapping for that.
I was just thinking, I know people who'd be into that, but part of what's interesting to me about this is the cautionary tale aspect. Why did those details change, and why did they change in that specific way? Let's just take the mental exercise of what if it was the Civil War Hezekiah Jones, Hezekiah number 1.
Mm-hmm.
Why change the story to have it be about a Confederate rather than a Union soldier?
Right.
Those little details, my theory is that they serve 2 purposes. There are 2 reasons for changing them. One is it fits the stereotype of the geographical location better.
Mm-hmm.
If you're talking about extremely decrepit war veteran from the South at the turn of the 20th century, then statistically you're probably talking about a Confederate.
Yeah.
But also maybe that's because somebody wanted to make the point that Confederate soldiers in the end were the losers and the bad guys. What if somebody didn't want the story to be about a Union soldier having something bad happen to them because they worried that would reinforce the wrong thing? Everybody who goes into the business of telling stories, no matter how formally or informally, ultimately eventually wonders, what's the point that I'm trying to make with this? And becomes conscious of that sort of thing. And so it would be very easy to imagine that there was somebody who said, I'm going to change some details about this, in part so that Hezekiah's family don't come after me, and in part because I want to make sure that people hear what I want them to hear.
Agreed. And they, as I said, it seems that this family, as big as it was, eventually went on to become very powerful and influential in the area. So
yeah,
I could, is it Dragnet? Names have been changed to protect the innocent.
yes, exactly.
All stories are based on true whatever.
It is also interesting to me because this story reflects a theme that I think is very common in stories of death in Appalachia anyway. And I suspect that this is true everywhere else, but I grew up in the Appalachian Mountains. And so all the like weird stories of weird stuff about people dying are ones I heard in that context. That is the idea of A, the dying know that death approaches, and B, the idea that they have some sort of visitation experience as part of that. And so like in my family's history, there are a million stories of somebody dying, and in their last days, they start having long, complicated conversations with people who are not there because those people have already passed on, or they start describing visions that they're having, or they start describing like having slipped over into some sort of realm of the dead and coming back and talking about what it's like there. A lot of those stories are about people being surprised by what they found there, which is one of the things that makes me at least take seriously that they actually experienced sensorily what they're describing. Whether or not that has truth value, I'm not here to determine. But that notion that death is not just an instant, but it's something that people feel coming. I find that a really powerful story. And I love the way that gets worked into this, where he's like warning people the devil is coming for me. And that moment of transition arrives in like big hoof stomping, chain shaking, turn your back so that you don't have to watch it happen, like big physicality.
Why do you always lock the door? I told you I was coming. This is rude. Is this how you treat all your guests? Because now I know why people don't like you.
Right. And it reminds me of like growing up in the mountains. I got told a lot of stories about people who were abusive partners and the ways that the people they abused sought revenge against them. And I don't know if any of those stories are true, and I'll never know because I don't remember the names of any of those people. I'm never going to be able to go back and research that. But it was the sort of thing that got talked about a lot. And that's part of what gave me the impression of things being done very informally in certain parts of the mountains anyway, where there was a lot of talk about like, justified revenge. That was a big part of the culture when I was growing up, was this idea that it's okay for somebody who's abused to seek retribution.
These are common themes. I don't think any of that is necessarily isolated to mountain culture. I think we talk a lot about human nature. We've talked not a lot. We have definitely touched on several points of human nature in this episode, wanting to see bad people get their comeuppance,
totally
excusing the abused for seeking retribution. I think it's almost universal, at least in the United States. I mean, I can't speak for world culture. I can speak to, in 1848, there was a giant pie with 120 chickens and 2 hogs. So unrelated, but this little book told me so.
I love also the fact that the odds are very low that a person was in the room and experienced this and then told it to someone who told it to someone who told it to someone who told it to someone.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering where along the way did the eyewitnesses get inserted into the story?
Right. There's so much that, how did it change?
Yeah.
So that's The Devil and Hezekiah Jones.
I love The Devil and Hezekiah Jones. It's like a great, meaty, weird, rural North Carolina swamp life. The devil shows up to take somebody kind of story.
This is so far from my tramping ground, and you made me walk all the way over here, and then you lock the door. You said, "Oh, I'm using these chains." That's it.
Does Google Maps have a tramping option for how to show you the route?
Hold on. Let me get my hell pad out, and my hell phone says, that's a lot. That's a lot of clip clopping. I gotta.
The devil is real. He calls it his hell phone.
Right.
That's amazing.
Wait for the Murder Quakers.
I'm very excited about Murder Quakers now.
Well, this is part of our October block of extra content. So thank you very much for listening to us during our second month of existence, October 2020.
Yeah.
So we're going to keep up some extra content during this spooky season, and we hope that you'll continue to join us.
I got to go. I hear some hooves and chains at my front door.
I said not yet. All right. Oh, sorry. Am I early? Yes, you are early. I'll be back. Sorry.
When the devil asks you to keep your calendar open. Don't like that one.
All righty. You've been listening to Arcane Carolinas. Thanks for joining us. If you liked it, give us a rating, leave a comment. If you didn't like it, send us an email and tell us why. If you're not wrong, we'll try to fix it.
And if you're interested in award-winning speculative fiction, including science fiction, urban fantasy, and horror, find me, Michael G. Williams, at www.michaelgwilliamsbooks.com and check out Falstaff Books at falstaffbooks.com.
If you'd like to pick up some Arcane Carolinas merch, look at behind-the-scenes info, pictures, videos, stuff like that, all the things that get cut, check out arcanecarolinas.com, where you can get access to our Patreon, our Facebook, our Twitter, our Instagram, all that in one place, including the merch store. Buy a shirt.
Clothe your body.
Drape your body in our wares.
Be our living billboards.